have a zero trust
There you go.
relationship with pumpkin spice. It is inappropriate to have
Fair
pumpkin
enough.
spice in September, and it is inappropriate to
There
have
you go.
pumpkin spice in January.
There
So
you
the
go.
reality
Fair
of it
enough.
is October, November, those are the right times for pumpkin spice, and the context is important. I don't like it in my
But
coffee.
there
It
you go.
messes
Love
up
it.
a good bean. But if you give it to me in a
And
milkshake, I'm okay.
we're thrilled to have you here, Andy. Welcome to the show. But before I ask you any other questions, and you can give yourself a little bit of intro, tell us about your trust issue.
John, it is really great to have an opportunity to have a conversation. When I think about trust issues, and I go back to my time in the enterprise, one of the things that I always stressed about was making certain that when we gave out a credential to anyone for whatever purpose, that it was going
Yep.
to the person who they said they were. We do a great job on authentication. We put multi-factor authentication in place. We've got mechanisms in place to make certain that once we have gotten a credential into someone's hands, that the right person is using that. Again, no matter what you're using, how many tokens you've got, whether you're using an authenticator app or whatever. So we've kind of solved that problem. The thing that always stressed me was whether it was on the customer side or it was in the enterprise side, how do I really know that when a user ID
Right.
and a preset password goes out, that the person who received it is actually the person who was supposed to get it? And I don't think we as an industry have solved that problem in any meaningful way. So that's my trust issue.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of an important one, right?
Yeah,
Making sure that credential really belongs to that person, right? For sure. For sure. So why don't you
100%.
give us a little bit of an intro? Where have you been, and what are you doing today?
Absolutely. Started out life as an electrical engineer. In fact, was in one of the very first computer and electrical engineering classes at Purdue University many, many years ago, and took a pretty circuitous journey. Spent time in a corporate realm. Had my own consulting company at one point in time that we grew up and sold. Spent time in a North America-wide facility services organization, building up a technical services capability for them. Went through a total bankruptcy with $1 billion company where one day I was working and the next day my job went away. That was a really interesting education. Started a
Yeah,
wireless
I
internet
bet.
service company. And I can tell all kinds of stories of being on top of a 30-story building in the middle of a thunderstorm, resetting wireless antennas to make sure our clients were able to maintain their connection, all the while lightning flashing around us. My wife wasn't real happy about that one. And
I
then
bet
landed at
not. Yeah,
Humana. Spent 21 years at
that's cool.
Humana in a variety of different roles in cybersecurity.
Mhm, mhm.
Spent about 9 years in identity and access management and helped build up their program from not the ground floor, but brought it into sort of a modernized IAM space, and then spent some time as a functional CISO over one of our subsidiary organizations, so more of a broader cybersecurity responsibility there. And now I'm doing independent
Yeah.
consulting, helping companies that, especially smaller organizations that may not be able to have a
Mhm.
CISO or someone who's got the
Right.
kind of experience that I've got by giving the benefit of my years of experience. So really, really loving that experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure those small organizations can really benefit from somebody like you, right? Who's been in the trenches for so many years and in leadership positions that you really know the business really well, right? So I got my first question here, right? So you've got a huge amount of experience, right? GRC, I saw that as well on your list of things that you've done, right? So you've been in that seat before, right? And like you mentioned, the functional CISO role, which kind of broadened your scope and what you were responsible for from a security perspective at the company level, right? Um, why don't you give us with that whole broad view of security? I'd love to get from you, the what both the tactical and the strategic aspects of what it's like, to work in such a large organization like that?
I think it's a great question, and I don't know that the concerns are different whether you're a large company or a small company.
Hmm.
I think the biggest
Hmm.
challenge in cybersecurity, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking cybersecurity writ large or you're looking at a subcomponent of
Yeah.
that like IAM, but I think it becomes really easy to get caught in the tactical, in the day to day, in
Hmm.
reacting to
Hmm.
the things that are happening right now. And we lose
Right.
track of what the strategy needs to look like.
Yeah.
Too many
Yeah.
organizations are sort of feeling their way along. They're going where sometimes their vendors are taking them. They're going where their
Right.
external
Right.
consultants are taking them, but they don't have a real view of what strategy looks like. I think part of that is
Right.
just the pace of business today. We don't have the time
Right.
to sit back and put our feet up on the desk and think deeper thoughts.
No.
And I think we're weaker because of that. If
Right.
we could culturally move to an environment where we are able to step back, think a little
No.
more strategically and a little bit less
Hmm.
reactively, we would find our
Yeah.
outcomes being better all the time.
Right, and I guess a question that's kind of related to that. Thank you for the insight. Right, it's like you just it just popped into my head right now when you were talking about the tactical aspect of it. I think a lot of the tactical aspect of the job is you're reacting to incidents, right? Like all day, and unfortunately, I've been on the on call side of the house in my career before. It's like and all night, right? And so like what's your sort of guide on as a leader now, right? How much time would you find yourself spending on the reactive part of the tactics versus actually laying down strategy and plans for the business?
I would love to say that we ought to be spending 20% of our time on tactics and 80% on
Mhm.
strategy. That
Mhm.
is a
Mhm.
pipe dream. Let's be real.
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
organizations
Right.
and most executives are spending 90 to 100% of their time reacting. Now it could be
Right.
to something more than just a security incident, for example. It could be the
Right.
latest
Right.
report that we've got to give to executive leadership or to the board. But
Sure.
even that
Yep. Yep.
becomes a pressing tactical reactive thing,
Right.
and we don't have time to
Right.
step
Right.
back and think. I think a great
Right.
ratio is 80/20. I'm spending 80% of my time
Yep.
dealing with the day to day, and I'm able to step back and spend
Mhm.
20% thinking more strategically. And I think
Yep. Yep.
if we all began to think that way, and some companies have done a great job.
Right.
They say, hey,
Yep.
we're going to mandate that you spend time
Yep.
sharpening the saw on personal learning,
Right. Right.
thinking more
Right.
strategically about your role, and then thinking more strategically about the
Mhm.
organization. Uh, but I
Right.
think far too few organizations have the foresight to think that way.
Right. They get so bogged down with like you're saying, right? Not just the events themselves, right? The incidents themselves, but the latest and greatest report that they have to react to. Like good point. So you bring up an interesting aspect of this, right? It's in the way I think about it, right? Security over the last, I don't know, decade or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, right? But increasingly, right, security's been is evolved into being not just that reactive organization within a company, right? It's become an actual integral part of the business, right? Like we've seen so many incidents happening, so much phishing campaigns attacking these large organizations or even small ones, right? My wife works at a school here, school districts getting attacked and things like that, right? So my question here is, how do you strike a balance between keeping a large business running and keeping that same business secure as a business partner now?
Great question. In my mind, it starts with building a culture of security. It may sound a
Mm.
little bit trite, but it's like you could walk into Kirkland's and see the
Mhm.
wooden plaque that says,
Mhm.
security begins with the individual. But that's a true statement.
Right,
At the
right,
end of the day,
right,
the number one security uh, preventive security thing that you can do is to teach your people how to do the right things, how to recognize
hmm
when
hmm
something inappropriate is happening, how to
right,
recognize when they shouldn't click on a link.
Right.
because
Right.
people ultimately are the weak link from a
Mhm.
security perspective.
Right.
And
Right.
the adversaries know that, right? I get
Yeah.
very concerned, for example, about the potential that AI has and the potential to use things
Mm.
like deepfake in order to create social engineering circumstances that work ever more increasingly
Mm.
effectively. Um, not to
Yeah.
bypass our technology security side, because I think, quite frankly,
Yeah.
most organizations have pretty solid technologies in place.
Yeah.
It's the people that are the weak link.
Right. Right. So, since you opened up the door, how worried are you about LLM leakage, right, of proprietary or other sensitive information?
I think when we think about large models and the data that's contained in them, I'm not sure that's any different
Yeah.
than thinking about
Yeah.
the data that we've already moved to the cloud, right? I mean, think about
Right.
every organization today that has put their large databases, their large data stores, their data lakes, whatever, out in the cloud. It's
Mhm.
already
Mhm.
there, right? So whether we're
Right.
using that for internal analytics purposes, or we're feeding that into a large language model, or some other AI facility, really is the same problem. I think we're going to get past that
Yeah.
problem and start to think more
Right.
practically about what does AI as a technology do, both from an adversarial perspective and also from a preventive perspective. Because I'm pretty excited
Right.
about what
Right.
can happen with AI preventatively, just as
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
concerned, on the other hand, around how it is going to enable our adversaries to be even more effective as they go
Right.
forward.
Right. Right. Great points. Switching gears just a little bit, the environment that you worked in for a while, for so many years, is highly regulated, right? You were both in the insurance and the health industries, right? And that's a lot of regulation going on there, right? What's that like? What's that like being? Go dig a little bit back into your history there, right? Both on the GRC side, on the IAM side, right? What's that like working in such a highly regulated environment?
Um, it can be both empowering and intimidating. I'll say that it's
Yeah.
empowering because when you're in a highly regulated organization, generally speaking, you're going to have support from the highest levels of the organization to do whatever is
Mhm.
necessary to establish and maintain compliance. So, in a highly
Right.
regulated industry, you're going to find it's easier to get security investment, for example,
Mhm.
especially when you look
Mhm.
at things like technologies. So
Right.
that is very empowering, to know that I've got to hit
Right.
these marks on a NIST framework, for example, in order to
Right.
demonstrate
Right.
compliance. It makes it easier to go and make the
Right.
business case to go and spend, the things
Sure.
that have lots of zeros behind them to achieve compliance. The
Right.
flip side to that
Right.
is you're typically answering to a regulator who is 3 to 5 years behind state of the art. And just being realistic
Right.
about it,
Right.
most regulation lags reality pretty significantly.
Right.
And so, quite
Right.
often, you're dealing with business requirements, or compliance requirements that really are no
Mhm.
longer relevant. And I'll give you a great example of that.
Right.
If you, as an
Mhm.
organization, have established a strong multi-factor authentication scheme, using, for
Mhm.
example, a mobile authenticator, using
Mhm.
biometric facial recognition and all of that, and yet
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
regulator is telling you you still need to have a 10-character password that's rotated every 30 days,
Right.
when we're trying to get
Right.
rid of passwords altogether. So that's an
Right.
example where the regulatory requirement is lagging the reality of where we are
Yeah.
from a true security perspective.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've wondered that for a little bit here, right? Maybe about the last couple of months because I've seen that clash happen between regulations, are way behind, kind of the newer security capabilities, right? And it's like, yeah, how do you tell an auditor? No, we not only do we have this covered, we're living, 5, 10 years ahead, right, of the regulation, right? It's a great point. So let's turn a little bit to IM. Um, I heard it probably about, maybe 12 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, something like that. Identity is the new perimeter, right? We've heard that, right? And it is something that's been around for a while. And how true or how accurate do you think that statement is?
It's an interesting thought. It echoes.
Mm,
You think about where we were from an infrastructure standpoint 5 to 10 years ago, and we talked about
mhm,
the
mhm,
crunchy exterior and the soft interior. And so we wanted
mhm.
to build the strong perimeter
Yeah,
around the outside, and then we realized that
yeah,
ultimately um, we're moving away from this idea of a barrier on the outside and towards true
mhm.
zero trust. I think the same
Right.
thing applies in the identity space. I don't
Mhm,
know that there is quote unquote a perimeter from an identity perspective because identity is at play in
mhm.
every transaction. Um, Now,
Right.
if we think traditionally how that works, it's very much like we thought about infrastructure security. You authenticate
Mhm.
one time, and once you're in, you're in. The
Right,
reality is,
right,
is I think we're now moving towards a model where um, the experience of authentication and authorization is going to become ever more discrete and dynamic. So
right,
again,
right,
let's think of a use case of someone who's been given administrative privilege to a platform. Why do we
right,
give them
right,
administrative privilege 7 by 24? Why don't we only
right,
give them
right,
administrative privilege when they're authorized to execute a change within the system or when they're dealing with an
right,
active
right.
incident? Otherwise, they no longer have that. Well, then I'm not having to worry about identity as the
Yep.
perimeter because they don't even have the authorization to do that
Right,
until the
right,
circumstance dictates.
right, right. I'm super glad you brought that up. I mean, you're now you're preaching my message here, right? It's great, and I love to hear it, right? And then, no, because it's true, right? I was about to ask you about what zero trust meant to you, and I'd still love to hear that answer, right? But it's one of the core tenets, right? Is don't trust, assume hostile environments. Another core tenet. Another one is verify explicitly, right? And the concept of least privilege. We've heard that term for so many years now, right? But really, what you're talking about is the ultimate form of least privilege, right? Which is like no standing privileges at all, right? You don't get nothing in the morning when you come into work. It's like your access list is none.
And it becomes contextual at that point in time, right? None of us
Right,
would, I
right,
think, consent to saying to a retail organization, "Hey, go make a copy of my credit card and keep it on file so that you
right,
can pull it out at any point in time and charge whatever you want to my card." Now, I think in
right,
the past
right.
we have done exactly that.
Yep.
But
Yep.
the reality of it is, we now are moving to a model where we are using various tools to consent to a financial transaction real time, so
Right.
that you know if that consent is being provided. Well, that is in
Yep.
a microcosm what I think we're seeing in terms of identity overall, right?
Right.
So we move to an environment where we are actually authorizing an action, a transaction, an access, whatever that
Mhm.
is,
Mhm.
dynamically at the time of use based on the
Right.
context. Well, how do you get there?
Right.
You got to have the contextual
Yeah.
information to do that. All right.
Yep.
So, what is the right
Yep.
contextual information? Now you're starting to talk big data. Well, okay, then how do you
Yeah.
process the
Yep.
big data necessary to make a contextual decision? Now you
Yeah.
start bringing things like AI to bear to be able to look for patterns to say, what does
Right.
John need today to be
Right.
able to do his job? Well, it looks just like something he did
Yeah.
a week ago. The context is very
Right.
similar. It's appropriate for him to have that
Right.
access today.
Right. Right. Except now John's trying to do that from Eastern Europe. Right,
All
to your
right. Well,
point,
it's
right?
part of
It's
the
all about the
context now.
context, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, so let's get into that, right? I'd love to hear the answer to my zero trust question, right? What does zero trust to mean? And I just really briefly because I think you've touched on all of the aspects of it, right? But what does zero trust mean to you? Practically, right? Since you've lived the role, right? What does it mean to you, and what in the context of what you've done, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I understand the term zero trust. I've bought into the whole idea of zero trust. I don't know
Yeah.
that it's really the right term. I would love to see
Okay.
the industry move towards something that I would call dynamic trust. And the idea
There
is,
you
is
go.
that
That's interesting.
again,
Yeah.
goes right back to what we just said. Your
Hmm.
trust level is dynamically established by the specific
Hmm.
context that you're in. What are you trying to do?
Yep.
What are you trying to access? Where are you coming from? What protections do you have in place? All of those things
Hmm.
come into play in establishing the current context to set the appropriate trust level at
Right.
any given point in time. In
Right.
in real
Right.
terms, it is moving away from a request-based environment. What does request presume? It
Right.
presumes that I know what I need and I know when I need it, or actually the way it practically works out is I know what I need and I might
Hmm.
need it someday, right? Where
Right.
a zero
Right.
trust says I don't know what I need, I don't know when I need it, but I know that when I need it, I
Yeah.
need to get it then.
Right. Right. Yeah. Great points. Let's shift a little bit here. Pumpkin spice or not? The
Oh my.
important question of the podcast.
It is an incredibly important question to consider. And I will say pumpkin spice in its time. So let's go back to this. I have a zero
There
trust
you go.
relationship with pumpkin spice. It is inappropriate to have
Fair
pumpkin
enough.
spice in September, and it is inappropriate to
There you
have
go.
pumpkin spice in January.
There you
So the
go. Fair
reality of
enough.
it is October, November, those are the right times for pumpkin spice, and the context is important. I don't like it in my
But
coffee.
there you
It
go.
messes
Love it.
up a good bean. But if you give it to me in
And
a milkshake, I'm okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe that sounds good. Actually, that sounds great. So yeah, with the theme, right? It's fall, Halloween time, right? And all that's coming up, right? We're gonna start seeing all the. I mean, well, if you've been to your local Costco, it's been Halloween for a while, right? but uh,
Absolutely.
but um, what recent or even older public or security incident that's been made public scared the bejesus out of you, or maybe more than one, right?
Yeah, I'm probably going to answer that question not so much with a specific incident, but
Okay.
what and I think of this in terms of uh, as our population ages and becomes more and more uh, e-enabled. What concerns me
Mhm.
is the readiness of any individual to trust
Mhm.
um, an inbound email, a phone call,
Mhm.
or anything else. And most concerning to me are some of our senior
Mhm.
adults who are
Mhm.
very trusting, right? And
Yep.
you
Yep.
hear stories of individuals having their bank accounts, their retirement accounts drained because someone was able
Mhm.
to establish a social trust with them over time,
Yeah.
and then were taken advantage of as a result of that. And I've
Yep.
heard so many stories of especially senior citizens having been taken advantage of through
Yep.
social
Yep.
engineering. And I look at that and I
Right.
think, well, there's a profit motive there. That's what motivates
Right.
many of our adversaries. I would say now most of our adversaries is that profit motive.
Right.
They are willing to
Right.
invest in technology to become better and better and better and more effective at that kind of attack. I think
Right.
we see it in our
Right.
organizations as well with executive spear phishing. And
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
I mean, what CEO in their right mind would actually believe that their CFO is contacting them to transfer $25 million in Amazon gift cards? You hear those
Right.
stories, and I think, how did you become
Yeah. Yeah.
CEO if you fall for that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'd be a little suspicious about that request, right? um, but no, I mean, I love what you brought up, right? The our aging population, right? I think a lot of them, like because I've got aging parents, right?
Mhm.
They're in their 70s, right? And we expect them, we give them an eye gadget, right? here, mom and dad, here's your new phone, right? And it's an iPhone or it's an Android phone, smartphone, right?
Yep.
And it's like the first thing they do is look at it, and I'm like, how the heck am I supposed to use this, right? And now you've got all of these attack vectors, like you're mentioning, right? These phishing attempts, and it's coming in through email and texts and all that stuff. Do you think we as an industry, now I'm kind of now shifting over to the actual device side of it, right? Because I think that's important, right? For that well, for all of us, we're all gadget users at this point, right?
Yep.
So, do you think the industry are we doing, better? Are we going in the right direction at the very least? I mean, like iOS 18 just came out and it's got a passwords app in it, where I can do some of the things I've been trying to get my parents to do for a long time. you know, um, what's your opinion there? Like, are we moving forward at the very least in that?
I think we're moving forward, but again, and this is coming from my view as having been a functional CISO,
Hmm.
it is an arms
Hmm.
race. And so the
Yeah.
adversaries are constantly looking for ways in. And as a security professional, we're constantly
Hmm.
looking for ways to block them. And so,
Right.
they find a pathway, we come up with a block. They find a new
Hmm.
pathway, we come up with a block,
Hmm.
and so on and so on and so on. I think technology is going to become both an aid to us and an aid to the adversaries. The very tools that
Right.
we will
Right.
use to protect will become the same tools that they will use to attack. And so,
That's absolutely
uh,
right. Yep.
and what's interesting is there's a stasis, right? I mean, I don't ever see the
Mhm.
adversaries getting too far ahead before the
Mhm.
marketplace catches up in terms of new
Mhm.
technologies, for
Mhm.
example. I
Right.
think it is
Right.
very reasonable to expect that,
Mhm.
as we build better and better processors on the devices,
Right.
and the software continues to improve, and we see, both Google and Apple have released AI engines,
Mhm.
or at least AI
Mhm.
capable
Right.
processors. That
Right.
you're going to see things
Right.
like the capability on the device to sniff
Mhm.
out a phishing attack or
Mhm.
sniff out a
Right.
social engineering call and be able to
Yep.
give, for example, a senior citizen a fighting chance to
Right.
avoid being taken advantage
Right.
of.
Right. Right. Great point. That's an awesome point. I love that aspect of it for sure. Switching gears just a little bit. You've been in the field for a long time, right? I have as well. What's the one thing, if you could pick one thing, I'm going to ask you to reach back, that you're most proud of in your career?
I would say it didn't amount to anything significant other than we met a very specific business need. And I'll go back to that wireless internet company that we built. We took a piece of
Mhm. Mhm.
technology that really wasn't designed for this purpose, and we figured out a way to get a tower climber to climb up on top of a tower and stick an antenna
Mhm.
onto it at 350 feet in the air,
Mhm.
and be able to distribute 1 megabit of internet access to small businesses. And this is, we're talking
Mhm.
25 years ago when we were doing that, back when, you were paying a lot of money for a T1 access. Today you think about 1 megabit and it's like, you can't do anything with that.
Yeah.
But then that was gold.
For sure.
And we were actually
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
enabling businesses who could not expand
Right.
otherwise to be able to enable
Yep.
themselves because they were able to get cost
Right.
effective internet service. That was a really,
There you
really
go.
cool nexus of a need
Yep.
that we were able to
Mhm.
fulfill, and a technology that was just evolving at that point
Right.
in time to be able to deliver that. So I'm really
Right.
proud of what we were able to do with that business. I would love to tell you that we grew
Yeah.
that into a $4 billion business, and
Sure.
I'm kicking back on my
Sure.
super yacht. But we didn't make any money on it.
Right,
But I
right.
learned so much from that.
Yeah.
That's where I got
So
a lot of
it's
my
sometimes yeah.
passion to help
Right.
customers.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Love that. So in sort of a similar vein, right? What advice would you give to someone that is number one, crazy enough to want to get into cybersecurity, and number two, even crazier to want to be, a leader in cybersecurity, like aspirations of becoming a CISO or some kind of leadership in this crazy industry.
Um, The simple answer to somebody moving into cybersecurity is be and stay curious. It is such
Right.
a rapidly evolving field that if you are not willing to invest your time and your energy in monitoring what's happening in the marketplace, first of all, second of all,
Right.
being willing to learn new things. And that means, this goes back to what we started out the conversation, that 20% of the
Right.
time when you're
Right.
able to kick your feet up. Quite
Right.
frankly, if you can't make that time to stay current in the
Right.
security realm, you will be left behind pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
You've got to be able
Right.
to make the time to be curious and learn new things. Now, to a
Right.
leader, again, this is something that may be a little bit trite, but the reality of it is every
Hmm.
leader is ultimately a servant. If you're going to be
Right.
an effective leader, your job is not to tell people what to do. Your job is to
Right.
help people excel at what they are excellent at, right?
Hmm.
Get
Hmm.
people into the right role and help them
Yep.
to excel. So if I were telling a leader what are the best things that you can do to learn,
Hmm.
it's actually
Hmm.
look at the organizations that do great customer service. Because I
Right. Right.
guarantee you, organizations that do great customer service also do great leadership development, and the two things are really,
Right.
really closely aligned. Be an observer of what makes great service. That will help you learn how to
Right.
be a great leader.
Right. That's awesome advice. I love that. So now you're doing freelance work. This is the part of the episode where tell us a little bit something. Pitch what you're doing. Introduce everybody what you're doing now and how they can contact you.
I appreciate the question. From my perspective, coming out of a Fortune 40 organization where, quite frankly, we had to scramble for resources, but generally speaking, we had most of the resources we needed to be able to do the job. Where I'm really passionate right now is working with smaller organizations who don't necessarily
Hmm.
have unlimited budgets. They may not
Hmm.
have really mature security programs, but they have the exact same challenges as much larger organizations. And so, what I'm able to do
Right.
is work with those companies to say, hey, how do we make the right investments? How do we make smart
Hmm.
investments? What are the things that I should do tomorrow to move the ball forward 10 yards?
Hmm.
How can I get a first down now as I'm moving towards the touchdown at the end, right? So I have a strategic goal to win the game. Well, how do I win the game? I make
Right.
some
Right.
touchdowns. Well, how do I make a touchdown today? I've got to move the ball 10 yards. And so I'm
Right.
able to help
Right.
small organizations do that, both in the IAM space specifically and more broadly from a cybersecurity standpoint. And I've really
Right.
enjoyed doing that kind of work. I could end up in another corporate or enterprise environment in the future. I don't know.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
that's one of the
Yeah.
beauties of being independent is I can entertain different options as we go forward.
Yeah.
But if somebody's interested in getting a hold of me and having expertise, I'm available on LinkedIn as aweeks10. They can reach me at andy@weeksmail.net. That's
Hmm.
my email address,
Hmm.
and get a hold of me.
Hmm.
And would love to have a conversation with anyone if they wanted to delve into any of the topics we've talked about today or other things.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, well, for everybody, we'll put Andy's information on the description of the episode so that everybody can reach out to Andy. Andy, what a great conversation we've had today. Thank you for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it.
John, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everybody, and that's another show. Have a great day, everybody. Whoa, how did I get into this little box here? John Martinez, your security barista here. Hope you enjoyed this episode of John Has Trust Issues. Make sure you like and you subscribe to the StrongDM channel to get more relevant content like interviews, like more John Has Trust Issues episodes, like product walkthroughs for StrongDM, etc. And you can see all that by subscribing and liking our content. Thank you very much.